everyone, and welcome back to the list. We're just jumping right back into things. With our number 6 pick, we have the Milwaukee Road Class F6 and F7 464 Baltics. Now for the F6, we're going to start with that first. That's the one on the left here. 14 of these were built in 1930 by Baldwin, with another 8 more built by Baldwin in 1931 as Class F6A. There's a couple of very slight differences between the two. Some, I think mainly it was the running boards. Some had broken, some had straight. The F6As were the ones that had straight number boards. They were designed for express passenger service from Chicago to Minneapolis, and most likely they were scrapped around 1955 at the latest. It's not really clear to anybody when they were truly scrapped, but I'm gonna guess it was around 1955. They are quite a varied class, and we'll talk about that in a second. They were very quick. They easily ran 90 plus and helped to establish the feasibility of the Hiawatha. In fact, in 1934, one of these locomotives was used in Hiawatha trials to see if it would even be worth trying to do this high-speed passenger service, and it was very successful. They had Baker valve gear, 80-inch standard drivers, 225 psi on that boiler, and the cylinders were 26 by 28, 45,250 pounds of tractive effort, and that had a 4.34 factor of adhesion. Now here's where the variation comes in. They were modernized around 1938 to 1940 and given the drop coupler pilots, which is why I like them. If you see right here, there's that drop coupler pilot. They were given that kind of treatment with the big numbers on the smoke box door near the headlight. It kind of just looks like a squished Milwaukee Road S3, and I really like that. That's just me though, but I think they look really, really good, especially with the outside equalized front truck. It's a pretty darn good locomotive, in my opinion. The variation is some of them had box-pock drivers installed, some did not. Some had their standard drivers with a Baldwin disc on the driven axle, which is right here where the eccentric crank is. It's really kind of a varied class, and I like that about them because for modeling anyway, there's no true prototype. You can just do kind of whatever you want. I really like that a lot. And I mentioned the outside equalized front truck. I think that's kind of unique because it gives a locomotive a different look. It's more of like a look that you would normally see on a trailing truck, and I just like how it looks. It makes it look more like a speed demon, because as I mentioned, these locomotives were true speed demons. And speaking of speed demons, as popularity of the Hiawatha service grew, so did the train lengths and the necessity for more power. The Class A Atlantics were fast and powerful, but they were being pushed to their limits. To solve this problem, Milwaukee once again turned to Alco for another powerful and totally badass speed machine. That's where we get the F7. 6 of them were built by Alco Schenectady Works in 1938 to supplement and replace the Class A Atlantics on the Hiawatha. Their iconic streamlining was done by Otto Kohler, and they served quite well on the Chicago to Milwaukee Twin Cities Hiawatha. However, they were only really suited for the Hiawatha service, and this is where some of their problems lie. Once they were bumped from the Hiawatha service by diesels, because Milwaukee was another one of those roads that very quickly dieselized, they were just kind of gone because they were not very economical compared to other locomotives when running on lesser services. They were assigned to one service, I believe it was called the Arrow, from Chicago to Omaha, and other locomotives could do this for cheaper, like the F6As, so they were quickly gotten rid of, and all of them were scrapped between 1949 and 51. These were also some of the last built Hudsons for any U.S. railroad, which is what makes these F7s special. They were very modern locomotives for the time. They had 84-inch box-pock drivers, which is owing to their high-speed service and just true nature of being a speed demon. They had roller bearings all around. It was Timken roller bearings on the front truck and all the drivers, ASF roller bearings on the trailing truck and all tender axles, and they had Welsh-Shearts valve gear with 300 psi on that boiler pressure. They had 23.5 by 30-inch cylinders. They produced 50,294 pounds of tractive effort, and then they had a 4.29 factor of adhesion. I very much wish either one of these locomotives would have been preserved, because I think like these are some of the best Hudsons that were ever produced, especially considering how fast these standard Hudsons were, and I think one of these would look really good running with 261, especially these F7s too. They're really great looking locomotives and one of the more iconic streamlined designs, at least I think so. Guess what? It's another British locomotive. Yep. For our number 5 pick, we have the LNER Gressley P2 Mikado. They were designed by Sir Nigel Gressley for heavy passenger trains on the Edinburgh to Aberdeen line in Scotland, which was known for its rather steep grades. I believe I read it was 1.34%, which compared to some of our grades over here in the US isn't really all that bad, but you have to consider that these are smaller locomotives, so they're not really designed for grades. And this was built to eliminate double heading because double-headed Pacifics were prohibited on the line, so they had to double-head smaller locomotives, and you can see the problem this creates. 6 were built by Doncaster Works in 1934, and they performed very well in service. Unfortunately, they were rebuilt to Pacifics by Gressley's successor Edward Thompson in 1943 to 44, and they sucked. They had constant flexing of the frames, and the drivers were too far apart. They kind of looked like a stupid version of the Thompson B1s, and they were all scrapped by 1961. They performed much better as Mikados, that's for sure. Original P2 number 2001 shown here. It's named Cock of the North. I know, haha, you can laugh now. All of these were named after different things of Scottish lore and pop culture, mythology, all that. The original 2001 was built with Lentz poppet valves, and then later P2s were built with Welsh-Shearts valve gear. Now you can see here, as this one's streamlined, some of these were given the A4 style streamlining, kind of like the 460s that ran on the LNER. And 2001 eventually followed suit due to issues that they were having with the valve gear. They had 74-inch drivers. They produced a max of 2,500 drawbar horsepower, and they had 225 psi in their boiler as their operating pressure. They had 3 cylinders, which was kind of typical for a Gressley design. A lot of his designs are 3 cylinders, and they had that's why the Welsh-Shearts valve gear is important, because it was Gressley conjugated valve gear. The cylinders were 21 by 26, produced 43,462 pounds of tractive effort, which is pretty damn good for a British steam locomotive. In fact, that's really good. They had a 4.15 factor of adhesion, which is also really good, and that just made them all around great locomotives. The good thing about these locomotives is that they're not going to be an extinct class forever, thank goodness. 2 of them are being built right now, a replica of 2001, and a brand new 7th in the class, Prince of Wales, and number 2007. Both of those are being built right now, so we will eventually see a running P2 in the future, which I'm very pleased about. For my number 4 pick, I have the L&N M1 class Big Emmas. Now, 42 of these were built for the Louisville and Nashville in 3 orders. The first 14 were built by Baldwin in 1942 and immediately assigned to fast freight service, as they were Berkshires. 6 more were built by Baldwin in 1944, and then a final 22 were built by Lima in 1949. As I mentioned, they served in fast freight service and they performed admirably. These were badass Berkshires, truly badass. The first batch was from the 1942 batch was scrapped in 1950, and the last 2 batches were scrapped in 1956. They were super modern, probably one of the most modern Berkshire designs ever built in the United States or even anywhere. They were credited with being the most expensive Berkshires ever built, having incorporated all the modern enhancements of the time. Basically everything that you could do to make a steam locomotive better that was known at that time was done to these locomotives, and that was why they were so expensive. They had roller bearings, some even had box pock drivers, as you see in this photo here. Some did not, but a lot did. Though those may be Baldwin discs, but I'm not sure. Those look closer to box pocks, though, to me. Anyway, those are quite unusual for a Berkshire compared to other Berkshires. Not a lot had box pock drivers, which is why they were assigned to fast freight. And while they were assigned to fast freight, it is noted that passenger service was of no obstacle to them. They were quite good performers in everything, really, which is what I like about most Berkshires. I'm sure everybody's seen 765 running at 70 miles an hour with an excursion. These could probably do that and more. They had 69-inch drivers. Haha, you can laugh now. They had Walsh-Earts valve gear, 265 psi on that boiler, and the cylinders were 25-inch bore by 32-inch stroke, and they produced 65,290 pounds of tractive effort. That gave a 4.11 factor of adhesion. What's even more impressive is they're credited with producing over 4,500 horsepower at and above 42 miles an hour. If you know anything about steam locomotives, you know that they produce horsepower in a linear fashion, so the faster you go, the more horsepower they make. They could handle 9,500-ton coal trains up pretty much unassisted except upgrades, which is insane. That's a Berkshire. We're talking about a Berkshire here, and it can handle a coal train that would normally be assigned to an articulated locomotive. That's ridiculous. It's really a shame that none of these were preserved, because I feel like, I understand that the preservation scene is very saturated with Berkshires, and it would be kind of redundant for somebody to build one of these brand new. However, I still would really like somebody to do that eventually. I think that one of these definitely should have been preserved, given how modern it is and how just amazing they were in service. So if anybody ever decides to do a new build project of one of these, I will immediately donate. 2 tenders do survive, however. Both of them are being used as auxiliary tenders. Welcome to the top 3. In our number 3 spot, we have the New Haven I-5 Shoreliner. Now, very much like my number 15 pick, the Lackawanna Hudson, this is yet another unfortunate case of a powerful Hudson that never got to fully stretch its legs. 10 of these were built by Baldwin in 1937 to run on the New Haven to Boston Merchants Limited. They proved to be exceptionally reliable, but due to lower speeds, that's why they never got to truly stretch their legs and show how quick they could be. They did quite well on the Merchants Limited, however, as 8 locomotives at a time, 2 of them being either under repair or reserve, would handle 24 daily trips between New Haven and Boston. The 24 daily trips, I'm not sure if that was there and back as in round trips, but I'll do my best in the future to look for that. I couldn't find anything on that. They had the unique streamlining as well, which is part of why I really like these locomotives. If you can tell, there's kind of a theme that's been going on here. Streamlined Hudsons. There's a lot of those, and streamlining in general. All of these were retired in 1951, and they had uniquely styled 80-inch box pock drivers. If you can see here, it's not a typical box pock driver, especially with the elongated kind of like crank. I'm not sure what you call that, but you can see how it's longer than it usually would be, and the holes are a little bit smaller. Very interesting on the designers at Baldwin's part to design it like that. They all had roller bearings. I believe 5 of them had SKF, and then 5 had Timken. The boiler pressure was 285 psi, and they were fitted with Walschaerts valve gear. Cylinders were 22-inch bore by 30-inch stroke. Tractive effort was 43,968 pounds, and then factor of adhesion was 4.39. So they were pretty darn good locomotives. This is another one that I wish very much that would have been preserved, especially because it's a different kind of streamlined styling that, especially with the drivers too, those drivers are really unique. These were kind of, in my opinion, very classy locomotives, and I very much wish one would have been preserved, but unfortunately all of them were scrapped. As we climb to the top of our list, this is the last locomotive before our number 1 pick and the last locomotive before our honorable mentions. This is the Southern Pacific P14 Pacific. Now, if you guys have never seen this before, because chances are you probably haven't, you're probably thinking, what in the fuck is that? Don't worry, I'll help you understand. So, originally, these began lives as P6 Pacifics, and 12 of them were built by 1913 by Alco Brooks. 3 of them were eventually rebuilt by the Southern Pacific's Houston shops in 1937 for a special brand new high-speed Sunbeam train. Now, this was kind of like a Texas Daylight almost. They were given full skyline casing as well as daylight paint, which was also unique for these Pacifics anyway, because the other Pacifics that did receive skyline casing and then daylight paint were not fully skyline cased like these are. They give kind of the impression of a squished GS4, and I really like that about them. A Sunbeam was a premium train that ran between Houston and Dallas, and it utilized streamlined coaches as well as a streamlined baggage. If you can see right here, there's that streamlined baggage, and in later years also used a stream-styled. Now, if you're not familiar with the term stream-styled, it basically means that you see this RPO right here. What they did was they made it fit in better with the lightweight coaches and streamlined coaches, and that's what they ran with. They ran with a stream-styled RPO in the later years. The train most notably had a very fancy-spancy and unique diner observation lounge, which was completely exclusive to the Sunbeam. No other train had that on the SP. So in the rebuild of the Pacific's, driver diameter increased from 77 inches to 77.5 inches. Drivers were swapped from standard spoked drivers to box pock drivers rated for 100 miles an hour, and wherever possible the motion was lightened. The guys at the Houston shops really wanted to make these hot rods, and they needed to be fast because the average necessary speed for the Hustler was 60 miles an hour. As the Hustler and the Sunbeam. The Hustler was the Sunbeam's forgotten little brother that was a bit slower, but the Sunbeam was primarily the one that they really needed to be quick for. It had to be 60 miles an hour or they couldn't compete. Because there was, I believe it was the CBQ, I'm not entirely sure, but I know there was a train that ran the same route, and they had to compete with that train on the same speed, so it had to run 60 miles an hour or it wouldn't work. So that's what they did. They made these complete hot rods and they made them really quick. Eventually, unfortunately, all were scrapped in 1955 as the Sunbeam and Hustler died, and around that time they were really kind of shells of their former selves, the trains themselves, not the locomotives. And it's really unfortunate that none survive. The boiler pressure was 210 psi. They had 25 by 28 cylinders, 40,000 pounds of tractive effort, and a 4.6 factor of adhesion. I seriously would love to see one of these built brand new, or at least just a replica to be put in a museum, because these are really quite obscure locomotives, unfortunately. I wish more people knew about them, but I feel like if the public knew more about this kind of locomotive, I think they would be in support of a new build project. I definitely think that it would look amazing running with 4449, but you know, it would cost quite a bit to do something like that, especially since you'd probably want to install roller bearings, PTC, all that nonsense. That would be very expensive, but certainly I think it would be a worthwhile project and very rewarding in the end. I mean, seriously, just look at that Skyline casing. It's a Pacific. It's a squished GS4. I better stop rambling about it. I really like this locomotive, but I don't want to bore you guys. So on to our honorable mentions. Rounding out the top of our list, you guys probably saw this coming at some point, we have the New York Central J3A Hudsons, both the streamlined and unstreamlined versions, as well as the S1B Niagara. Now, we're going to start with the Hudson first. 50 of these were built in 1937, and they had initially box-pock drivers, but were later converted to skull and disc drivers. Though some had a weird mix of the two, it really depended on the locomotive. They were primarily assigned to express passenger trains such as this 20th Century Limited, especially the streamlined Hudsons, and most were retired in the late 1950s. Wonderful, wonderful locomotives. They had 79-inch drivers, and they were really, really quick. A lot of people estimate them as being capable of around 90 miles an hour. Easily one of the most recognizable designs of any American streamlined locomotive ever. Even if you've never actually heard of the name, you probably know what this locomotive is. You've probably seen it before. Wonderful locomotive. I really think it's a shame that none of them were preserved. And thankfully, though, one of the Hudsons, a piece anyway, does survive in the form of a tender that was converted to a steam generator car, and that's at Steamtown right now. To add further to the Hudson, they were Alco products, as were the Niagaras. It seemed the New York Central in their later years really trusted Alco to get the job done, and boy did Alco get the job done. Usually. There are exceptions, like the S2A Niagara, but we won't talk about that. That thing is satanic. Now, as for the Niagara, very much like the Hudsons, they also had 79-inch drivers and box-pox, though they kept their box-pox, unlike the Hudsons, which a lot of them were given skull and disc drivers. They had roller bearings everywhere, as you can tell right here. The fatter rods, those are roller bearings. Roller bearings, I do mean everywhere. I believe I read in the incredible book, Know Thy Niagaras, you guys should definitely check that out, that a team of maybe 2 or 3 guys could push one of these Niagaras down the track, which is incredible, a testament to how well designed they were in all the roller bearings. It's also widely accepted that these were the absolute best of the passenger locomotives ever built for any railroad in the United States, period. They had ridiculous amounts of horsepower and tractive effort for their size, more so the horsepower than the tractive effort, though. They produced something like 6,600 boiler horsepower, or cylinder horsepower, which is indicated horsepower. That's different from drawbar horsepower. However, they did produce around 5,100 drawbar horsepower, which is really, really good. They were not slouches at anything. A lot of people actually note that they could outperform the T1s, the Pennsylvania T1s, in everything except speed, though they were rated for a design speed of 120 miles an hour. It's really quite a shame that none of these were preserved, especially because the design is actually quite as unique in that it's shorter than your typical 484. Because what Alco did was they had a problem because they had to design a 484 that could fit in the New York Central's lower loading gauge, which was 15 foot 2 versus 16 foot 2, which was typical. So they kind of just, what they had to do is they had to take a FEF3 and squish it. Kinda, not really. There's a lot of differences between the two, but that was the basis for it. They took an FEF3 and they squished it, and they were incredibly free steaming locomotives. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not going to talk about the S2A because that thing is satanic. It had Caprati valve gear, and it was a nightmare. It was actually one of the first to be scrapped. All of these Niagaras were unfortunately removed from service and scrapped between 1955 and 56. I seriously wish one of these would have been preserved, because it really does represent the top of all steam locomotives ever to grace the rails here. There's nothing better. I will stand by that. There is nothing better. Definitely both of these locomotives, I feel, should get a new build in the future. I know there's going to be some people like, who's paying for it? You're going to pay for it? Ooh. Yeah, I will donate. I'll donate as much as I can. I'd be happy if somebody was going to do it. I'd happily donate. But I don't think it's likely to happen, unfortunately, which is really sad. But, you know, at least I would have at least liked either one of these to be in a museum. It doesn't even have to be running, but we never were that lucky. Well, anyway, that does it for my list, guys. If you enjoyed, I thank you for coming this far. If you saw part 1, I really appreciate that. And I might do another list like this in the future. I know it wasn't that great a quality. I'm sorry for that. I did try. I suck at scripts. I cannot write a script, nor can I stick to one. I try, but I suck at it. And yeah, anyway, I'll see you in the next one, and again, thank you so much for watching.